There you go. How you doing? You're very, very welcome to a very special event on Trasna and Tíre. Every county has a story relating to the War of Independence, and County Clare certainly has many. The Scariff Martyrs incident is the most commemorated War of Independence event in County Clare, and the emotion of the event has endured, particularly with the older generation. For those of you who aren't so familiar with the event, this is the story of 4 men who were tragically taken to the Bridge of Killaloe by Crown forces and shot dead. They became known in song and story as the Scariff Martyrs, and in Killaloe as the 4 who fell. The 100th anniversary commemoration was exemplary in terms of its dignity, its pride, and in sorrow, which was live streamed across social media. And we would like to welcome the relatives of some of the people who unfortunately were killed 100 years ago. The event tonight features oral historian Dr. Tomás Mac Conmara, who has done so much in terms of helping Clare remember its history. He will publish his 16-year research, The Scariff Martyrs, War, Murder and Memory in East Clare in spring 2021. We have got the Dublin-based historian Liz Gillis, who I'll be introducing you to in a few minutes. We have Councillor Pat Hayes, who will also be introducing you to, who's the chairman of the East Clare Memorial Group. And myself, in case you don't know, I'm Marcus Howard of Easter Rising Stories. I make film documentaries around the 1916-23 period. Our thanks to Liam O'Sullivan and Trasna and Tíre for hosting this important event. The discussion will reflect on the incident itself, where it sits in the War of Independence, why so much emotion is connected to the event, the importance of associated songs, as well as the strong commemorative and memorializing history of the event. We hope this event will help to pass our history down to the next generation and do their memory justice. We're going to begin proceedings by showing a beautiful video which East Clare Memorial Committee commissioned ahead of the centenary. It features the famous song about the incident by Christy Muir, which he had specially re-recorded for this event. So we'll play it for you now. 1 second here. Liam, hang on 1 second here. Just let me see if I can get the video playing. Tomás, I'm going to bring you in first and I'll play the video just after, okay? So
no problem at all.
Let me get this sorted, okay? So Tomás, can you just let me know a little bit about who are the Scariff Martyrs?
No problem at all. Thanks a million, Marcus and Liam O'Sullivan as well. Look, just to put it simply, the 4 who fell as they're known in Killaloe, the Scariff Martyrs as they're known in broader parts of North East Clare. I suppose to an extent we can separate them into 3 and 1, even though collectively obviously they're brought together in terms of the end of their lives. But Alphie Rodgers, Michael Brud McMahon and Martin Gildea were active members of the Scariff Company in the 4th Battalion of the East Clare IRA. And Michael Egan, the 4th man, was not a member of the IRA. He had been the caretaker of Williamstown House, an old hunting lodge, where in November 1920, the other 3 volunteers found themselves sheltering in while on the run. And Michael allowed them to stay there. They stayed there for a period of time and were eventually captured by British Auxiliaries who had been based at the Lakeside Hotel in Killaloe. Now, I'll go into more detail, obviously, later with regard to the story, but it is important to have that sort of understanding that even though they're collectively brought together very powerfully in terms of their experience and of their death, that there is that distinction between Rodgers, Gildea and McMahon and Michael Egan, who was pulled into the story only at the end because he allowed the lads to stay in the house where he was caretaker. And also when the Auxiliaries arrived on the 16th of November 1920 with information that the 3 IRA lads were there, Michael tried to divert them and to tell them that there was nobody there. So as a consequence of that, he was brought into the SS Shannon, which was the boat that they used to travel from Killaloe down to Whitegate, and was brought with them on the boat back to Killaloe, was brought into the torture and the beatings that they got for about 8 hours, and was also brought out on the bridge at approximately 12 o'clock. Now we'll go into more detail on that, but it's certainly okay to say now, you know, that I've not met anybody. You mentioned that I've been researching this for 16 years. I've never met anybody who believed the official account of what happened on the bridge that night, which was that the 4 men made a combined attempt to escape and were shot on refusing to halt. But obviously I've had to look at that very, very closely over many years to try and pick apart what exactly might have happened on the bridge that night and look at patterns elsewhere, which Liz obviously would know very, very well. But, you know, what's really important to say, I think, you know, by way of just setting the context for the Scariff Martyrs is that, you know, in East Clare, it's certainly, you know, one of the most significant events in the War of Independence. I would suggest that it is certainly the most emotive event because, you know, even in the 100th anniversary, which Pat Hayes will talk about in a little while, you could still sense the emotion. You know, it's almost like they only died a short time ago. The connection that people feel to the story, and that's cultivated by the nature of the event, the nature of their deaths, the brutality of it involved, but also the connection that has continued since then in terms of the song, in terms of the monuments, in terms of the commemoration that have happened over the last 100 years. It has maintained a very strong emotional connection between the people of East Clare and the four boys, as they're often referred to. Tommy Holland down in Whitegate, who's really connected to the story, will always characterize them as the four boys because that was what they were described as at the time. So, you know, it falls into, at a national level, which Liz will explain, it falls into, you know, a really unprecedented period of violence. It follows a period of about 2 months of increased activity in East Clare, in which the three lads were actively involved. But it was a very severe blow to the IRA in East Clare, obviously, firstly, to the families. And it is an important point, I think a really important point to make, that there is this duality of experience with the Scariff Martyrs, because, and it's the same, I suppose, with the McMahon brothers, which were, you know, in the middle of marking their centenary as well, the lads up in Shanaglash are. But you have to recognise that, first of all, you have the family who have been traumatised at an almost incomprehensible level. You know, it's impossible for us to be able to put any words on how much of an impact it had on the families. And that's one experience. But then there is the community experience, which, you know, is traumatic at first, of course, for their friends, for their, you know, relations, for their comrades. But that transforms over time into, you know, solidarity with the memory of them, and a determination to remember, and a determination to continue on, both with, I suppose, the struggle in one sense, and then with preserving the memory of those four men as almost an ongoing tribute to them. So there is this duality of experience, and certainly the families are incredibly proud of the four men, but we have to recognise that, you know, first and foremost, there's the human, brutal impact of having lost their four sons, and the impact that had at an emotional level.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll just play the video for you now.
And the dreadful news through Ireland has spread from shore to shore, and such a deed no living man has ever heard before. And the deeds of Cromwell in his time, I'm sure no worse could do than them black and tans that murder does for youths in Killaloe.
We're here at Scariff Church grounds at the final resting place of four men who became known as the Scariff Martyrs almost 100 years ago. At the height of the War of Independence, on the 16th of November 1920, 3 IRA volunteers, Alphie Rodgers, Michael Brud McMahon and Martin Gildea, were captured by the British Auxiliaries at Williamstown House in Whitegate, about 8 miles or so away from here, and on the shores of Lough Derg. Another man was taken with them. He was 23-year-old civilian Michael Egan. He was the caretaker of Williamstown House, and he had been sheltering the men. All 4 of those men, along with Michael and John Conway, 2 local farmers, were taken on board the SS Shannon and transported down the lake to Killaloe. There, after many hours of beatings and torture, the 4 men were taken onto the bridge at Killaloe and shot dead. Another 4 days later, on the 20th of November 1920, the 4 men were buried here in the churchyard at Scariff. Since then, their story has endured right across the East Clare landscape. And now, 100 years later, their community remembers them.
And now that they are dead and gone, I hope in peace they'll rest. Like all brave Irish martyrs, forever among the blessed. And the day will come when all will know who sold their lives away. Of young McMahon and Rodgers, brave Egan and Gildea.
Okay. It was a very powerful, moving video, I have to say. It was really, really fascinating what you guys have done. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Liz Gillis. Liz Gillis was born and raised in the Liberties in Dublin. Her love of history has been instilled by her father, Mick. She's written some fantastic books on Ireland's revolutionary history. I think I have them all, from the Hales brothers and the Irish Revolution, May 25th, the burning of the Customs House, the fall of Dublin, revolution in Dublin, as well as Women of the Irish Revolution. She's appeared in a number of Irish history documentaries that I've made on Dan Breen and Michael Collins, as well as a number of RTE documentaries and talk shows. She's a fantastic historian. Liz, you're very, very welcome tonight.
Thanks a million, Marcus, and thanks to Trasna Tíre for hosting it, and for Tomás for inviting me to take part.
Liz, I was wondering if you could tell me, how does the event of the Scariff Martyrs fall into the national context of the War of Independence?
It fits really into it. You know, it's a horrific event, but it's a culmination of things, especially that you see with the arrival of the Auxiliaries. Like, things were bad when the Black Tans arrived in March 1920, but they got an awful lot worse when the Auxiliaries arrived. Like, their presences felt pretty much immediately. You start to see an increase in raids by the military. Now, there had been incidents where people were shot trying to escape. In February, you had there was one chap, sorry, I have it here, Patrick Lynch, where he was from Waterford and he was involved with the IRA, and the military came looking for him. And there was this thing that they said they'd left the house, and you know, he was thinking that this might now be his chance to make a break. But when he went to the hall, he heard voices whispering outside, and it was the soldiers that were literally waiting for him to make a move to run, and then they were going to shoot him. He didn't, but that night 2 other guys called Lynch were shot. You have another chap in August, and he was from hospital in County Limerick, and he was taken by the military, and he was shot, big inverted commas, trying to escape. You see it in Dublin, where they were picking up a lot of IRA guys, interrogated. Beatings came along with interrogations. You had the shooting of John Lynch, Councillor John Lynch, in the Exchequer Hotel, thinking that was Liam Lynch that they were going to arrest, or in this case, shoot. And the official version always given was shot trying to escape. And you see that by September, October, and certainly by November, the gloves were off in terms of the activities of the Auxiliaries. It was like they were just out to get as many as they could and just roll out that response from Dublin Castle. They were shot trying to escape. They believed it, no one else did.
Okay. One thing that's interesting about this period in the War of Independence is press, you know, the role of the press, I suppose. Sometimes they can be biased in some respects in other events. What were they like in terms of this event? What was the press coverage like?
By that time, because so much had happened, Marcus, like you're looking at the reprisals all across the country, you know, like the sack of Brigham, you have Milton Melbay, all of these places that were deliberately targeted, civilians deliberately targeted by RIC or Auxiliaries, a mixture of Crown forces. And newspapers that, well, apart from the Irish Times and the Belfast Newsletter, which were totally, you know, supporting the British perspective, but newspapers that probably would have been more middle of the road, they began to question the official version of events. The Irish Independence would be one example. In terms of the reporting about this event, very early on, the newspapers were questioning what was coming from Dublin Castle. You have like the national papers, the local papers, the Liberator, the Irish Independent, the Guardian, and not only were they reporting on the initial act of what had happened, and questioning that. Like there's one quote in one of the articles that was written where they said, you know, this is what happened. They were taken to the bridge, and Tomás go into this more in detail, but that they were shot trying to escape. But it's just a line where they say, but that would, looking at the position, that is the most unfavourable place to try to escape. So you can see that the newspapers were questioning what was being reported or given by Dublin Castle. Of course, the Irish Bulletin, that follows, that was the Republican news sheet, and that has information about the event, the aftermath of the event, and that continues over the weeks. An interesting thing to point out, on the 24th of November, there is an account of the funerals, but it was stated on that day as well that there were plans for a monument. So right from the get-go, the four boys were going to be remembered by their community.
Right, okay. Well, recently we covered Bloody Sunday, you know, and you looked at McKee, Peadar Clancy and Conor Clune. Do you see any similarities there, or anything that you'd like to mention about that?
Well, the similarities are amazing, and not just with the Scariff Martyrs, because you've got Scariff Martyrs, you've got then the three men in the castle, but then following on from that, you have the Lough brothers and so on. So this is a pattern that is continuing, but there is a direct connection between Scariff and Dublin Castle, because Conor Clune is that link. He had attended the funerals of the four boys and was then headed up to Dublin. He arrives at Vaughan's Hotel on the night of the 20th of November. The raiding party come to Vaughan's. McKee and Clancy had gotten away. He was arrested, taken back to Dublin Castle. The Auxiliaries then got word where McKee and Clancy had gone. So they went to Gloucester Street, Sean McDermott Street now, to the house of Sean Fitzpatrick. Minutes before they had arrived, McKee and Clancy had burnt the lists of the names of the men who were going to be assassinated next morning. They were taken to Dublin Castle, and then the events of Bloody Sunday that morning happened. We then know about Crow Park. That wasn't enough killing. There was not enough revenge meted out by the Auxiliaries. And unfortunately for those three lads, F Company Auxiliaries were based in Dublin Castle. Hoppy Hardy, who was attached to them, was actually on the list to be targeted. And all of a sudden, the next day, Michael Collins gets word that the three, McKee and Clancy, had been killed. Conor Clune, again, the official version, shot trying to escape. Now, what they did with this, though, where it gets worse, where the planning really comes in to try and cover their tracks, is they then staged these photographs where showing how the three men tried to escape. You know, there were grenades lying around, there were shovels lying around. You actually see the window that they said they tried to get out. There's bars on it, and they were released. And of course, the newspaper reports, but no one believed it. But there you can see the similarities. But in the case of Scariff and Dublin, that direct link to those traumatic events is Conor Clune.
It's amazing. It's amazing how it's all interconnected. Thanks very much, Liz. We'll be hearing from you later on as well. Next up, we have Pat Hayes. Pat Hayes is from Mahara in East Clare, and he's been chairman of the East Clare Memorial Committee for over 20 years, and he's been a member for almost 30 years. He's a local councillor with the Fianna Fáil party and has a strong commitment to the story of the Scariff Martyrs and the fight for independence in East Clare generally. Pat, you're very, very welcome tonight.
Thanks, Marcus, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. We're delighted to be part of this, and thanks for telling our story at a national forum, because while there's lots of national things going on in the last number of weeks, Kilmichael, Bloody Sunday, and previous 1916 and all that, we here in East Clare, we commemorate our own heroes, because we believe that the Scariff Martyrs are very much part of the national story. I live up here in the side of a mountain up in Mahara. I'm between the border of Cllr and Galway, and that's where the Lough brothers are, just down the road from me either. And there a few weeks ago, actually, here in East Clare and Fecal, we had an event for the Fecal Ambush as well. and that was a precursor to the Scariff Martyrs. So we live in a good Republican area, I would say, and probably still holds that ethos in certain ways. So there's nothing wrong with that in my view, but things moved on. But we are looking back, and I suppose as a politician, we're not political about these events. We're trying to make sure that the events that happened in that particular period are commemorated and they're honoured, and we pass it on to the next generation. So there's people learn from their history, and it's humbling, I must have said, in the last few weeks when we're having our events for the 100th anniversary, which would have been huge events only for the present COVID crisis. We just saw the emotion in people, and it was humbling to actually be at the grave in Scariff for the 100th anniversary and stand and think that it's only at the same morning there was a woman in Killaloe celebrating our 100th birthday. And you know, that brings it into perspective, really. These were, we stand on the shoulder of giants in that word, in terms of these people were ordinary people, but they believed in what their case was. And I think as a community and as a group, East Clare Memorial Committee, I would say, have flown the flag for the last number of years. And I'm involved for over 25 years or more in this committee, a small committee. Mayor Ryan and Tomás and a number of different people over the years that kept the flag flying. Not alone do we do it on the 100th anniversary, but I think we're one of the longest memorial committees that continuously hold events every Easter Sunday morning. And also we held special events in the 90th and the 80th and all those back as well. And trying to keep the decades. But we have a memorial park in Chumgraney, which was funded by the people in support of the East Clare Old IRA and Commemorated, and it's a dedicated park there in the heart of Chumgraney. So I think we're very proud of what we do, but it's only the people that are around us, in terms of when you look out from the grave and you look at relatives and friends that are connected, you suddenly realize, well, we're doing the right thing here. We're making sure that the memories are preserved, and we're also making sure that the true story, and people like Tomás, now we're very honoured to have somebody like Tomás with his research. We're telling the true story, because sometimes things that happen on a year or two get misinterpreted or challenged in a different way. But when you go back that particular period, with having gathered the memories and having had the people laying wreaths over the years that were directly connected, and I just find that we have a clinging and emotion to those people. And recently, before the recent lockdown, we went up to visit Kathleen Mitchell up in New Inn. She was a niece of Martin Gildea's, and we presented her with a picture we had done, because all she had ever seen was a black and white old photo, and we got it digitized up into a colour photo. And the tears of sadness that ran down her face when we presented it to her, thinking that my uncle, what had happened to him. And all that connections, and every day we're learning something new. It's an education in itself for us at a local level. So we think here in East Clare we've contributed very much to the national case in terms of history, and we continue to do that. And it's something we enjoy, but it's something that we feel we're giving back to the people, and that's one of the most important things for me.
Yeah, I thought how you guys commemorated it was really beautiful. I thought that there was a really, really dignified ceremony. Like, this is the live stream of the event on the bridge, and just it was a mixture of pride and sorrow you'd really see in the community and those who were filming. It was so important to get the story right. It seems like. How was it for you? When
the national anthem was played on the bridge in Killaloe and people sang, I doubt if it had happened in 50 years, and I doubt it, and that was only probably twice it ever happened in the Bridge of Killaloe. The national anthem was sang on it. So those are parts of history that will never be relived. And we had plans to have the boat come down the lake and a horse-drawn carriage to bring the in memory to Scariff as well. But look at, we're still in the year of centenary in terms of their memories for the coming year. So please God, in the coming year we'll get a chance to add to the events of this as well. But I think they were very emotional, and families and connections, we got great feedback. We're not looking for praise in any shape or form. We're just glad to be part of this, and glad to be able to relive the story and pass it on to the next generation. And the schools were very much involved as well, which is a real bonus to us all.
Oh, it was fascinating. I saw they're making the plaques in the school. It was really, really good. But it's a full credit to you for doing it. Well done. Thanks very much, Pat. We'll be talking to you later on as well. Next up, I'm going to introduce Tomás Mac Conmara, and he is an oral historian and author from Tuamgraney in County Clare. And he has done so much, not just for County Clare, but for remembering Irish history. He was awarded a PhD at the University of Limerick in 2015 for his exploration of the social memory of the Irish War of Independence. Since he was a teenager, he's been recording the memories of older people, particularly relating to the revolutionary period. He's published 6 books, including Days of Hunger, the Cllr Volunteers, and the Mountjoy Hunger Strike of 1917, as well as, and I'd highly recommend this, his 20-year oral history collection work, The Time of the Tans. Tomás, you're very, very welcome today.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Thanks a lot. And again, just can I mention thank Liz Gillis there, because she's been really brilliant in terms of, even as a sounding board to me as a historian. She's somebody I admire and respect hugely, and I'm very grateful to that. And Pat obviously has been championing the cause of the Scariff Martyrs for almost 30 years, obviously, and working away quietly and really committed to it. So it's fantastic to be involved in that. And I suppose that's reflective in a sense of the story and the way in which the story can kind of trigger the emotion. Because you mentioned the kind of mixture of pride and sadness, and that's really, I think, an appropriate way of describing the memory of it. Now, in sometimes we have to separate the history and the memory, but I don't think necessarily those things have to be pulled apart completely, because they are intertwined in the way that we relate to our past, and that's certainly the case with the Scariff Martyrs. So look, I'm delighted to be here, Marcus, and looking forward to a good chat. Brilliant.
I have plenty of questions for you. Could you maybe tell me what East Clare was like during the period and maybe touch on the background of it?
Yeah, no problem. I think the background is actually really important, and it's something I believe very strongly that, you know, you have to get an insight, if you can, into the kind of mindset and the consciousness of the people during, for example, the revolutionary period. And that goes, you know, right across the country in terms of measuring the temperament and measuring the attitudes of people, and why maybe some areas are more active than others, etc. But in East Clare, you have, you know, like in most parts of the country, you have activity during the land war. But there's one particularly important episode that I believe has a relevance to the Scariff Martyr story and the War of Independence generally, and that's the Bodyke evictions of 1887, which would be seen as, you know, nationally would be seen as a very big moment in the land war in terms of the defense of homes, the delaying of the evictions for 2 weeks, the coming together of the communities all around the village of Bodyke to the eviction scenes, and the solidarity for the people in Bodyke. And that means this is 1887. All of the Scariff Martyrs are born within 10 years of that. So they're growing up very, very close to one of the biggest episodes that happened in Ireland during that time. And of course, they're hearing that story. They're also hearing about 6 years before the Bodyke evictions, when a man called John Maloney, a 50-year-old man, was killed by an RIC man after he was hit in the head twice with the butt of a rifle. And that's part of the same tension in terms of the landlord John O'Callaghan. And those events, when they're remembered in local history and in local memory, are very much connected with British rule, even though there are many people who will separate out or attempt to separate out the land war from, you know, political tensions. I don't believe that needs to be the case, because certainly for people, in terms of forming their attitudes towards British rule, the land war, the evictions would be seen as a constituent part of that injustice. So for the likes of Alphie Rodgers and Brud McMahon particularly, you know, growing up in Scariff, where there were massive demonstrations held during the Bodyke evictions, Michael Davitt would have been in Scariff speaking in 1887. So those stories come through, you know, and they come through in familial ways as well, because you have, you know, John Maloney, who I mentioned, who was killed. His grandson is an active IRA man with Alfie and Brud and Martin during the War of Independence, and very much connects his activism with what happened to his grandfather. So all of this is very much, I believe, connected in the formation of political attitudes and political consciousness. So before you even get to the War of Independence, I believe there's a foundation there, certainly, for what takes place. The East Clare election of 1917 is really, really important as well in terms of Eamon de Valera's candidacy. Now, more so, it's not Eamon de Valera as such at the time. There was a big kind of a running kind of a cant around East Clare that he was called everything from the devil may care to all sorts of different names, because they couldn't pronounce his name when he came in first because nobody knew him. But it was really significant because it brought all of these, you know, leading IRA and coming figures to East Clare, and these were becoming household names. You know, the likes of Tomás Ash, etc., were becoming household names. Now they're in the area. So for the likes of Rodgers, McMahon, and Gildea, who were all in Scariff at the time, this is a really significant moment, because you're seeing now publicly, you're seeing republicanism played out when it was never before the Easter Rising, because anybody who would even be carrying a Republican newspaper or would publicly declare a Republican position would be arrested immediately. So I think that's really significant for all young men and women, that they're seeing public representation of Irish republicanism and those attitudes. So McMahon, Rodgers and Gildea become actively involved, certainly at that point. Now it's important to mention Martin Gildea, because Martin was from Galway, from New Inn in Galway, not too far from Lough Derg. And I think Joe Dwan is there. Joe would be a great grandnephew of Martin Gildea. He's here with us tonight as well. But Martin would have worked up in Kilcullen and Kildare for a period of time, and then came down prior to the Easter Rising to Scariff, where he worked for a man called Denham Sparling in a shop there. And Brud McMahon and Alphie Rodgers were both from two families that ran businesses as well, two shops. So they would have got to know each other quite well from, you know, working in the same small town, and obviously were committed together. It's also important to mention just briefly in relation to the three lads there that, you know, there's plenty of evidence to show their commitment to the Irish language, first and foremost, and Irish culture. Martin Gildea was an advocate of Irish dancing and taught people in Scariff, while Brud McMahon in particular and Alphie Rodgers were real strong advocates of the Irish language. And when Liz mentioned Conor Clune earlier on, the formation of that connection happens there, because Conor is brought to Tuamgraney because a man called Edward MacLysaght has set up a Nua Gaeltacht. He's really determined to develop the Irish language, and he actually is really successful. He brings families from the Ring Gaeltacht in Waterford and from Carrigaholt, etc., to live in the community, to build an Irish language community. So Conor and Brud McMahon would have been both involved in that, and I think they gravitate from the cultural through to the political and to the military eventually. So by the time you move in towards the War of Independence proper, you have Rodgers, McMahon and Gildea fully committed to the idea of physical force and the need for physical force. East Clare, I suppose, to some degree is typical of other parts of the country in terms of the development and the increasing tensions. You have, of course, the election in 1918, etc. But then in 1919, you see attacks on RIC outposts, you see attacks on RIC barracks, you see barracks starting to close down in East Clare. So that's a pattern that, of course, is in line with other parts of the country. But now you're seeing McMahon, Rodgers and Gildea being involved in these actions. So you're seeing, what was first in the mind has now become, physical, and they're actually involved in physically confronting what they're seeing as British rule. But 1919 progresses, in a pattern similar to other parts of the country in East Clare. It's only really, and I'll hand it back to you then, but it's only really when we reach the middle of 1920 that we see the types of ambushes that characterize the broader War of Independence. But certainly there's enough evidence by 1919 that East Clare, Scariff, places like Tuamgraney have that blend of cultural nationalism. They have the acceptance of the Sinn Féin separatist position, and they also have a commitment to the physical force, the need for a physical force approach in terms of liberating Ireland. I should mention as well, Pádraig Ó Caoimhe was a really critical person in terms of this period as well, in terms of the cultural nationalism and the Irish language. And Pádraig's granddaughter, Carol Mac, is there, I think, as well. and has done a fantastic documentary without clergy, judge or jury on the Scariff Martyrs as well for Scariff Bay Radio. So that's another avenue into the story. But yeah, so you have that environment has been created and cultivated. It's based on the historic foundation. It's based on the growing sense of nationalism, the growing commitment. And you have Rodgers, McMahon and Gildea fully committed. They are recognised as significant officers in the 4th Battalion within the Scariff Company. Even though, and the final point before I hand it back to you for this question, Rodgers and Brud and Gildea have managed somehow to maintain an outward identity. So because the RIC didn't realise until quite late in the day that them 3 lads were involved in the IRA, even though they were in Scariff Town. Alphie Rodgers was a stone's throw, and handy stone's throw from the RIC barracks, yet they didn't know until very late in the day that he was such a committed active IRA man.
Okay, great point actually. Something that we were discussing earlier in the week was that, counties parochial, I suppose, in terms of remembering its history. In County Clare, we've got our historians here, we have our relatives here, but maybe not everybody would know what the story is of the Scariff Martyrs. Could you maybe outline what the Scariff Martyrs story is? What happened?
Sure. Yeah, no problem, Marcus. Yeah, look, I mean, typically in cases like this with the McMahon brothers, even maybe less so with Padder Clancy because, it's such a forceful experience, but certainly with the likes of the McMahon brothers and the Scariff Martyrs, most of the attention for the people who are aware of them is on their end, on their death. And that's a consistent thing in terms of memory internationally. But it's important to understand, obviously, the background to them individually and their background collectively. But where I suppose I can bring it up really is in terms of that intensification in the middle of 1920. Because we had seen the barracks attacked. We had seen, as I said, that typical escalation. But by the middle of 1920, as Liz has suggested earlier, things are really becoming significant. And that relationship between what's happening locally and nationally and internationally is symbiotic all of the time, because you have, for example, Terence McSweeney is on hunger strike, as we know, throughout much of that period. And after the fecal ambush, which I'll come to in a few minutes, in October, on the 7th of October, when the priest, Father Patrick Riley, is being attacked from outside his house by Black and Tans and RIC, and shots are coming in through the window. He recorded afterwards that he thought of his parents and prayed for them, and he thought of the Lord Mayor and prayed for him. So you have a priest in Fecal in East Clare being shot at through his window in the middle of the night, and he's praying for the Lord Mayor, who's over in Brixton Prison. So there is this relationship all the time between what's happening locally and what's being seen internationally. So what happens in Scariff, what happens in Tuamgraney is the national history, and it's something I've always believed, and I know that Trasna and Tíre has been working on that basis of the value of that local history. But the key dates in terms of the Scariff Martyrs, the latter part of their story really are from the 18th of September 1920 through to the 16th of November when they're captured. Because on the 18th of September 1920, the East Clare IRA attack the RIC barracks in Scariff. Now it is the largest fortified barracks left in the Northeast Clare area, because all others had closed down at that point. And most of the ones that had closed down, the RIC men from that area and the Black and Tans from those areas moved into Scariff. There had been a barracks defence officer had been sent into Cllr and sent into East Clare to fortify the barracks in Scariff, and he did so. He was shot very soon after that by the East Clare IRA with his own gun, and had to be taken up to Dublin, where ironically on the night before Bloody Sunday, when Michael Collins' squad went out, he ended up being one of the men that was shot dead. He unfortunately had a name similar to a man that was on their list, even though he wasn't the man on the list. He ended up being shot that night in Dublin. So John Fitzgerald was his name. So the barracks attack in Scariff is really significant. It has involvement from battalions all across the whole East Clare Brigade area. Previous to it, large hand grenades had been sent down from Dublin through a network of IRA members, eventually arriving in O'Callaghan's Mills, being brought from O'Callaghan's Mills over to the Dyke, where they were hidden in a house and eventually taken over to Scariff that night. Joe Clancy, a former British soldier who was involved in the attack, Micheál Brennan, who would be very well known, the OC of the East Clare Brigade, and Martin Mac, the neighbour Mac, all used the hand grenades. Absolutely none of them worked, which added to the tensions between East Clare and Dublin, because there was this feeling already that Dublin weren't sending them enough weapons, and then suddenly the weapons they sent them didn't work. So that didn't do much for the relationship between the East Clare area and the headquarters in Dublin. But nonetheless, it's a really, really significant attack, and it shows as well the relationship between the Republican movement and the local people, because in the days beforehand, you know, there had been this sort of a whisper going around for local people to gradually and subtly make their way out of Scariff, because you're in Scariff town. If there's going to be shooting around the town, you know, the houses encircle the town, so you're likely somebody is going to get hit. So most people in the town made their way out of the town in the day or two beforehand, and ultimately it lasted. It was a significant firefight. There were 2 RIC officers injured, Michael O'Sullivan and Edward Broderick. They didn't die, but it was a very significant attack. Now the RIC, to be fair to them, in the Black and Tans, they defended the barracks, you know, very courageously for that night, because there was serious fire on them. You know, the IRA went up on the roof of the barracks and threw down grenades, you know, into the building. But as I said, they didn't detonate. But the IRA withdrew after a couple of hours. But what was significant is in the days that followed, the RIC made the decision to abandon Scariff Barracks. Now that was really, really significant, because that was a heavily fortified barracks, and now they're moving out of that. So all of the encircling villages had been abandoned in terms of RIC presence. Now you have the barracks from Scariff has been abandoned. They moved to Killaloe, which will become significant later in the story. But that means that, you know, from the period of the 18th of September on, large parts of North East Clare are devoid of a constant police presence. And that has real significance. It's a victory for the IRA in lots of ways. You know, it could be suggested to create some sense of complacency in other ways. And other consequences that it means that the raids from Killaloe, particularly after the auxiliaries come in, become all the more violent when they do come from Killaloe into North East Clare, and that has its own consequences obviously as well. So moving through, maybe speed it up a little bit, but the other key dates leading on from that are the 25th of September 1920, which is only a week after the barracks attack. Micheál Brennan leads an active service unit of the IRA of about 15 volunteers into the village of Broadford, where they attack the RIC, and one constable, Michael Brogan, is shot dead. Now he's the first RIC man to be shot dead in East Clare, and you know, that in itself, of course, is a significant moment. Liz mentioned Multall earlier on. That happens on the 22nd of September. So that kind of separate, that's in the middle of the barracks attack and the attack in Broadford. And I have a sense, I can't be sure about this, but Micheál Brennan escalates his activity after the burning of Lynch, Multall and Inistymon, which is at the other side of the county. But there is an indisputable rivalry between the leaders of the East Clare IRA and the Mid Clare IRA. And I believe that certainly part of the motivation for Brennan to become so committed and so, I suppose, violent during that period is that the Mid Clare Brigade had such a big military success that I think there was a sense that Micheál Brennan wanted to ensure that the East Clare IRA were doing as much. Now there's a military strategy to that as well, because, you know, there needs to be a diffusion of activity, or else the British forces will concentrate in one area. So yeah, so the 25th of September, Michael Brogan from Atymon in Loughrea, near Loughrea, is shot dead. Now, very significantly as well, one of the attackers involved in Broadford is from James Hogan, who is from Loughrea. He'd only a couple of miles from Atymon, from where Michael Brogan was from. And he, at the time of the attack in Broadford, was the professor of history in UCC. He had got tenure a couple of months before that, and took, I don't know, was it an official leave of absence, but he left UCC and joined the East Clare IRA and became involved in the creation of history, I suppose, before he went back for 40 years and lectured it. But 4 days after that incident, there are 2 RIC constables shot dead in O'Brien's Bridge, which again wouldn't be too far from Broadford. Again, another active service unit led by Micheál Brennan. So these are, things are really escalating from the point of view of the IRA's campaign. And then, as Pat mentioned earlier on the 7th of October, which is another week on, the Fecal IRA launch an attack on the RIC in that village. And, that's a really significant attack. Sergeant Francis Doherty and Constable William Stanley are shot dead. So again, it is evident that the IRA are upping their campaign in East Clare without question. Fecal is an area that in itself had, real, as Pat mentioned, real Republican consciousness right back to the Fenian period. But in that period, I think a lot of it had been exacerbated by the local priest, Father Michael Hayes, who had really taken a really strong position against the Republican movement and who was boycotted by the large portions of the local congregation. So the 7th of October, the Fecal ambush happens. There's reprisals and significant number of houses are burned to the ground, obviously, after the ambush, and people are beaten, which is typical of the kind of reprisal strategy at that point. But the tension goes on in Fecal. The housekeeper of Father Hayes is taken away by the IRA on a boat over to Tipperary and told never to come back because she was asking questions about the IRA locally. She's brought back by a military escort eventually back to Father Hayes. And then on the 27th of October, a man called Martin Coonahan is shot dead by the local IRA on the suspicion of being an informer. And that's really, really significant in terms of the Scariff Martyrs story, because there's an informer involved there. So you're seeing a real escalation, as I say, of that. So that brings us to the 27th of October, which is only 2 weeks away, or well, a little over 2 weeks from when the Scariff Martyrs are captured. During that time, they had been sheltering in the Whitegate area, had eventually made their way towards Williamstown Lodge, which was an old hunting lodge located on the verge of Lough Derg. Now, concurrent with that, you have in Killaloe the arrival of G Company of the Auxiliaries, who arrive with 109 officers, a Lancia, cage car, 6 Crossley tenders, 2 Ford cars, a really heavily armed unit come in. They immediately stamp their presence, the same as all auxiliary units have done around the country, and start intimidating and beating, obviously, local people as well. But they're obviously told about the situation in East Clare, and you can see an attempt straight away to respond to it in very brutal fashion. Now, clearly, between the start of November and the end, or the 16th of November, information is given to the auxiliaries that the 3 lads are staying in Williamstown because they requisition the SS Shannon, a steamer from the Office of Public Works. And in the morning of the 16th of November, a detachment of G Company leave the Lakeside Hotel. It's the first time they've used the water to make their way deeper into Northeast Clare. Traditionally, they'd come on the road, and the IRA had a really good lookout system where they'd burn fires on the top of mountains so that the IRA deeper into East Clare would know that they were coming. But on this occasion, they came by boat and were able, unfortunately, to come right up to the Williamstown Harbour, which is only about 100 yards from the house, and made their way in then to the house. And as I said, encountered Michael Egan first, who tried to make out that there was nobody there. And eventually, obviously, they found the other 3 lads and they were taken back to Killaloe. And just without getting into massive detail, because, it's been mentioned, but certainly when they're brought back to Killaloe, they arrive back around 3:30, they're held, during which they're beaten and tortured until about 12 o'clock. And that night they're brought out on the bridge of Killaloe. And therein then is the question, what happens next? Because the official account, as Liz says, is that they were shot trying to escape. I've obviously looked at the military court of inquiry that goes into more detail on that version. But ultimately there's 3 ways it could happen. There's that it happened as the British say it, which is, not believed by many people. And even just, it's worth making the point, when the Lucknans were killed 10 days after this, I was really reading it recently that a South African called Victor Percival Lawrenson stood up in the court of inquiry after the 2 boys had been found and their bodies mutilated beyond comprehension, and said that I was there when they escaped. you know, which is an absolute fabrication. So it just gives the evidence that there was no difficulty at all with fabricating a story. And I think that's something that, you know, needs to be hit in the head first of all, that military courts of inquiry are given far too much, you know, credit, because if the auxiliaries and the British forces generally are prepared to do what they did to the Scariff Martyrs or the Lough Derg brothers, then they're certainly prepared to lie in a military court of inquiry. But still, it's an important source. So they either were killed by the way that the British described. They were, the other two alternatives are that they were encouraged to try and escape in a bid to shoot them dead, which did happen. Like, there was plenty of evidence of people being encouraged to run, but there was less evidence of people running, you know, because it was well established that, you know, to run would be, you know, suicide. And then the other alternative is that a combined force of the auxiliaries, the RIC and the Black and Tans took them out on the bridge to murder them. And, you know, I think that's probably the one that most people believe. Now, obviously, I've had to break it down into fairly microscopic detail, Marcus, and to everybody. I shouldn't just address Marcus, but to really, I suppose, try and scientifically break down what is likely to have happened and how we know that and what are the sources. And like, it brings immediately from the moment of it, it brings the community into the experience, because the oral recollections are really important, because people are hearing on the bridge at 12 o'clock. This is during curfew. This is on the bridge. It's November. You know, sound travels further, closer to water. The oral conditions are perfect, and people hear screams. They hear prolonged moaning. They hear intermittent gunfire over a long period of time. The two priests at either side of the bridge testify to that later. The Dennis Crowe, who lived in the building closest to the bridge, testified that he heard this prolonged screaming and calling for a priest, etc., peppered by gunfire. And then the other key witness, of course, is John Conway, who was one of the two farmers who was taken in the boat with them. They were very badly beaten, but eventually released. But his testimony on the whole experience is really important in terms of what actually happened that night.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. Because I've read, what was this? One of the witness statements of where they're describing that they could hear the beatings, and the way it's described, it would put the hairs in the back of your neck. Like, it's really, really gruesome. I wanted to ask you, in terms of songs and monuments to do with the Scariff Martyrs, like we just heard about the Christy Moore recently re-recording a song, but, you know, can you tell me a little bit about the songs and monuments related to Scariff?
Yeah, of course. Well, they're really, really important, because, I mean, right from that moment, like from whenever the shots are fired, and particularly because after they were killed, the British refused to release the bodies for over 2 days, and that was another wound to the community, because obviously culturally it's really important for families, you know, and emotionally, to get their loved ones back as soon as possible, and to begin the process of the funeral. So that was another kind of injury to the community, and that's borne out in terms of the determination that, as Liz says, at the funeral when it took place, the auxiliaries and British forces arrived and, you know, really had an intimidating presence at the funeral. But all of that was kind of, I suppose, added to the commitment to remember, and it was declared at the funeral that there would be a commemorate, or would be a memorial put up there. Now, that happened eventually in Scariff in 1945, which I'll come back to, but Killaloe was the first place on the Bridge of Killaloe where it happened. In 1923, which is really, really early, in November 1923, the monument was put up there. And because people in Killaloe, you know, had such a connection, people saw the blood the following day. I mean, I'm looking there, I think I see John Fahey is on the call here, or on the lecture. And John's mother, Madge Fahey, was a teacher in Killaloe, Madge Costello at the time. She walked over the blood the following day, you know, and she never forgot that, and spoke to John and, you know, other people around, and her pupils as well. So there was a real commitment in Killaloe that something should be done to mark that spot, you know. And Mike the Hawk Daly, led a campaign to have a memorial put up there, and it was the second oldest memorial in the country. It was installed in November 1923. So then you had a site of memory, you know, on the bridge, so people passing would always know. And that's part of, I suppose, the commitment of Pat Hayes and the likes of them to you know, shine a light on those sites of memory. But back in Scariff, then you have that continued commemoration and commitment You have the big anniversary in 1921. The shots are fired then, which they couldn't be in the day of the funeral. But that's a big moment because the truce is in effect. There's a comfort there, you know, so you have thousands of people assembled, including hundreds of volunteers for that to mark it properly. But in 1945, a monument is put up at the grave in Scariff. And, you know, that's a really big moment. And there's a huge crowd there. Pat mentioned Kathleen Mitchell earlier on, who we went to see. Only a week before the commemoration or before the lockdown. She was at that, you know, and she remembered it, you know, and I remember her telling us that, you know, she had, I would have recorded her memories, you know, and she said that she heard shots that day in 1945, obviously as a salute, and she thought it was the Black and Tans because she had heard so much about the Black and Tans, the stories growing up, and she was a young girl that got frightened, but it was a really big moment in terms of the installation of a monument and a further commitment. The East Clare Memorial Park then in Tumgraney, right in the middle of all this, where I'm from myself, was unveiled in 1952. So that's another big site of memory. And in addition to all that, then you have the songs which you mentioned. The one that Christy Moore sung here was a really early composition, and you know, tells the story in that narrative way, right through from their capture through to, you know, their murder, the funeral. All the key elements are in the song, and I believe the song played a really important role in preserving the memory of the story because of its composition and construction, but also because of the fact that people sung it and recited it consistently over the years. But there are other songs. In Killaloe, Jack Noonan wrote a song called The Four Who Fell in the 1960s, and interestingly, whenever you're in Killaloe, they're called the Four Who Fell, not the Scariff Martyrs, but everywhere else they'd be referred to as the Scariff Martyrs, or sometimes the Killaloe Martyrs. But the songs have an effect on the way people remember, quite obviously. But there are other compositions that should be mentioned. Mary McCarthy from Killaloe wrote Heroes All as a tribute. Pat Conway from Ballina on the Tipperary side wrote a number of compositions as well. The late Sean Crowe wrote a poem about them. So, you know, these are all personal kind of contributions to the memory of the four men as well. So they all play a really important role. So the kind of confluence of monument, memory and commemoration have been really consistent over, you know, an awful lot of years at this point, and are still I would say very, very important.
Okay. One thing that I noticed about you, Tomás, is that you have been working your socks off in terms of getting the Scariff commemoration, the centenary event remembered. And I was wondering what your thoughts were about the ongoing connection and feelings in the community and the 100th anniversary. How did you find it?
Yeah, it was a really important experience, but I think, I mean, in fairness, I've worked hard, but Pat Hayes there has worked incredibly hard, and as you know, like any good endeavour, there's a handful of people that are really committed, and we're lucky with that, with Pat and Shane Walsh and Mayor Ryan and John McGran. Mike Rodgers is there with using his wife's name, I think, Marion as well. Mike is the grandnephew of Alphie Rodgers as well, and Mike is really committed to the story as well. And I think Jerry Quinn is there somewhere too, who's another relation. But the connection is really, really strong, Marcus. You know, but I think we're not naive enough to suggest that, you know, everyone knows the story, or that everyone who passes the monument knows the story, and they don't need to know the full story. But our ambition, I suppose, isn't just to have, you know, and I'm talking now as a member of the Memorial Committee as opposed to a historian, but our ambition isn't just to kind of have a recognition on a particular day, you know, even though the 100th was really emotional and important because it just is that landmark. But our ambition is, I suppose, that anytime someone walks past the Bridge of Killaloe or the grave in Scariff or the Memorial Park in Tumgraney, that there'll be some meaning to that, you know. And I think that's really the clue to local history anyway, that, you know, people, any part of the country should be able to look at their own landscape and know it and read it and realise the relationship or the relevance it has to them in terms of their daily life. So, you know, that's certainly part of my commitment as a member of the Memorial Committee, is to shine a light on local history and the way that local history is actually national history, you know. And there's been, from my view, far too long a recognition on what are called, you know, professional historians or national historians, and that sometimes you almost, I'm sure Liz would agree with me, sometimes it's like someone is referred to as a local historian is almost like, well, they're a step down, you know, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think Trasna and Tíre have really put a very powerful light on that, because, you know, if I'm able to contribute anything, right, and I appreciate your positive words earlier, it's because I've spent a lot of time trying to listen to people and hear the stories and really hear it deeply, and obviously do the research, you know, the proper methodology, the proper research in terms of archaeology or of archives, all of that has to be included. But without, you know, the attention to local memory, local knowledge and local understanding, then it's not possible, in my view, to understand the history you're trying to research. And my ambition as a historian is to understand that history. And if I can't understand it, then I can't tell it. So if I do understand it, it's because I've listened to people, and because that connection that you mentioned is really, really strong in the local community, particularly with the older generation. Then there was fertile ground for me to go into to try and listen to people like Margaret Hoey, who I interviewed about 12 or 13 years ago, was 16 years of age at the time when it happened. She knew Alphie well, she knew Brud McMahon well, she knew Martin Gildea well, you know, and whenever I interviewed her, she was 105 years of age, and she cried tears in front of me when she recalled the day that she heard, which would have been the day after the incident, when news came back to Scariff that the boys had been killed. And, you know, she was able to describe them as if they were after walking out of the room we were in, you know, and funnily, she couldn't remember any of their brothers or sisters who lived for decades later, but their image was imprinted on her mind. And, you know, that's just, again, a symptom of the connection that people have, or certain people have. But I suppose the challenge for any commemoration group, or certainly for the East Clare Memorial Committee, is to ensure that the younger generations have some connection to it. Now, they won't have the same, you know, personal connection that maybe the likes of people like that had, but still they have, it relates to them, and it relates to them really strongly. So our job is just to shine a light on that.
Yeah, but they're real though, do you know what I mean? By you having those conversations with those people, they're not just a photograph. You're able to find out about their mannerisms, what kind of a person that they're like. I think it's really, really important that, and what you're saying about it being national, I mean, just judging from the audience tonight, we've got people here from America, we have people here from Australia, we have people here from England. So maybe, you know, we've been a bit harsh in terms of saying that it's a very national, or, you know, county centered story. The story is getting out there, and hopefully with this event as well, we'll help to spread the story a little bit more, I think. You know, you got a book coming out, don't you, next year?
Yeah. Well, it was meant to be out in October, but obviously because of COVID, it was decided to put it back until the spring of 2021 at the moment. And, you know, in some ways you'll be disappointed, but in other ways then, because we went through the commemoration, you get these little fragments, and like, even though I'm 16 years at it, you're still, people come forward and say, you know, they might give you a name of somebody. For example, I got the name of somebody, of one of the men who drove one of the 4 horse-drawn carriages from Killaloe back. I had gotten one already, and then I got another one. And, you know, that just adds another human dimension to the story. And all of these little fragments that you gather up over many, many years of research, you can start to put them together when you take your time at it. And that's the one thing, like, whether the book now is good or bad, that'll be up to people to decide. But certainly I know that I've given it enough time, and that's something I believe very strongly in, that, you know, history takes time. And, you know, even when you narrow the lens to a local level, you actually see more, and you need to see more. So it takes even more time. And, you know, the fact that I'm 16 years later, I'm still getting little bits, is testament to that. So the hope is that it'll be out in the springtime. And, you know, the other hope, of course, is that, you know, this bloody thing will be gone, and we'll be able to come together, because I know that certainly, and I'm sure Pat will agree there, like, particularly for this story, you know, I know there's people who would love to come and meet and kind of, you know, just recognize that event as well, you know, the launch of a book. But whether it does or not, it'll be out in hopefully the spring of 2021. And as I say, hopefully does justice to the story. And I mean, not just, I mean, there is sometimes a need to put commemoration in one context, and obviously historical publication in another. And there's an awful lot happening, and there's a need to recognize, of course, you know, as I documented there was a lot of people killed, like the RIC fellas who were killed, and, you know, the book needs to deal with all that, and hopefully it does. So it's not just it's obviously not a hagiography, like, but it's you know, hopefully it does justice to the importance of the history and the memory, if you understand me.
Okay. Yep. No, absolutely. I think we'll move to some questions from the audience. We'll open up to the panel as well. I'll read out some comments as well from some of the people who've spoken, because we've got some amazing comments here as well. So Eddie Bohan has said that his grandmother was from Killisboglunan near Liscannor, and she told okay, I apologize, I'm from out of town, okay? And she told me that as a child herself and her brother as children filled the open ends of old house keys with matchstick heads, sealed it with a nail and threw them at walls that the tans passed, making them sound like gunshots. As they hid while the tans took cover, they watched as the tans shot dead 15 to 20 cows in nearby fields, which had a devastating effect on the local community. She said one local was so devastated by the loss of the few cattle, he threw himself off the nearby cliffs of Moher, unable to cope. Wow. Just something else just that was said, like a question, I suppose. Niall McMahon has asked, he'd love to know more about Joanna Scott's involvement in the release of the bodies.
Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. And you know, it's really, really important because Joanna Scott, who went on to marry Dennis McMahon, had been a nurse in the First World War and had you know, an awful lot of experience in terms of the British military machine as such. But she was back in Scariff when this happened, and her brother would have been an IRA man, and obviously her brother-in-law was Brud McMahon. So when the bodies were being held, Johanna went down with a number of other people to Killaloe and confronted Victor, you know, Gwynn, who was the district inspector, and quoted rules because she had an understanding of those rules. And so she played a really important role in the confrontation with the police about that, but she was never recognised. I mean, there's a Denham Sparling who was involved. He had been Martin Gildea's employer, a local Protestant merchant, really, really important figure, and he's given credit, and rightly so, of having gone down and secured the release of the bodies. But Johanna had a really important role in that as well, but just wasn't recognised. But she you know, was really, I suppose, affected by that and cut all ties with her former British service, etc. Took the name Siobhan even afterwards as well. So she deserves to be recognised in the overall story, and she certainly is in the book. And Niall is her, I hope, grandson. I could be wrong on that, but certainly very close relation with Johanna.
Okay. Marion Rodgers has said, "Hi everyone, on behalf of the Rodgers family, can I say a big thank you to Marcus and Liz and Liam for hosting tonight, and a special thanks to Pat, Tomás and the East Clare Commemoration Committee for all their time and effort in keeping the memory of these four boys alive. Also to Scariff Bay Community Radio, who produced a superb documentary on the story available on podcast. We are incredibly proud of Alphie, Brud, Martin and Michael, and can only dread to imagine how our lives or futures could have been so different but for their sacrifices. I am fourth generation living and working in Alfie's childhood family home business. So once again, Mila Buikas." Thank you very much, Marion. I had a question for you. What happened at the 1920 funeral? Did something happen?
Well, the most significant thing was that the auxiliaries arrived from Killaloe under Colonel Andrews, who was the officer commanding of the auxiliary company. They came with the RIC and Black and Tans as well. So, I mean, again, it's almost futile to try and kind of describe the tension of that, because you have all of the four families are there ready to bury their four sons, and having the bodies been held for 2 days and refused to be released, and then they arrive, and they're very, very intimidating. They go through the crowd, they search people, they push people, they even jostle them as they're getting ready to bury them. So there's remarkable tension at the funeral in that context. IRA men hide in the spire of the church, you know, so they didn't find them, luckily enough for them. But yeah, so it very much adds to the kind of hurt in the community, the nature of the funeral, because even with the Lucknan brothers, which was, you know, the most sadistic thing I've ever encountered, even though the Scariff Martyrs was brutally bad, but even there, they were left to bury them alone, and they were left alone to bury them, I should say. But in Scariff, they weren't. Even at that moment, they were intimidated and you know, treated really, really badly. So, you know, it's really important. We spoke, and we brought a number of people back who were at the funeral before they passed away. Paddy Gleeson was 106 when he died. We had Paddy Leary, he was at the funeral. He often talked about it. So the funeral is a big moment in the overall story as well.
Okay. Now, something else that I just want to read out as well is that, let's see, Eamon Healy has said, Thomas, your point about Michael Brennan and possibly his sense of competitiveness with the Mid-Clare Brigade is very interesting. I'm from Bay in Galway.
Baha.
Okay. As I'm sorry.
I'll keep correcting you, Marcus.
You will keep correcting me. Wait till you're up in Dundalk. I'll do the same back to you. I've written about the Lough brothers in the past, and I seem to recall that the Bea company were attached to the East Clare Brigade until mid-July 1921 and reorganisation. Is it possible then that Brennan's influence may have had an impact on the organisation of the Castledale ambush in Galway on the 20th of October 1920?
Okay, Eamon has done great work, actually. I've read a lot of Eamon's work. Now, the answer is no, firstly, because in October 1920, Michael Brennan was very, very active in East Clare, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of Broadford, O'Brien's Bridge, and he was wounded in late September, and so was in East Clare throughout October, but was there without a doubt. So he wasn't involved in Castledale or involved in the organisation of it. But the East Clare IRA in 1921 become attached to the South Galway IRA, because there is a sense that East Clare, because I suppose of that period of the winter of 1920, had developed a lot of experience. Michael Brennan particularly was recognised by the HQ as, you know, a serious operator. And likes of Joe Clancy, you know, who's a former British soldier, Martin Mack, former British soldier, you know, these are really experienced, capable volunteers, and they're sent up to South Galway to assist in escalating the campaign up there. So it's really in 1921 when the relationship between East Clare and South Galway. Now it's more East Clare go up to South Galway rather than South Galway being kind of connected to East Clare. So it definitely has a relationship with Castledale is too early. Now whether there was really intelligence or even weaponry sent up, that's certainly possible. You know, the relationship was always there between South Galway and East Clare. But whether or not, because you have the mountain range you see coming between the Baha and coming in towards Killinane and where Pat's from, and that's really important because there's a lot of weaponry moved over and back across that mountain range. But that's manifested, as I say, in 1921, certainly when the East Clare IRA go up there to support the South Galway IRA in escalating their campaign in that area.
Okay. Noel McGlynn has a great presentation. Many thanks to all. Eddie Bohan has asked, of the RIC involved in the killings, were there any locally born members involved, and what happened to them in the aftermath?
No, I've looked very closely, and there's a man called Ger Brown has done a remarkable work in Ennis in documenting the RIC personnel across County Clare during this time. But no, there aren't any locally born men in the RIC, but certainly the RIC are involved. And you know, there's when you break down that story, there's always some, like Edward Broderick, for example, you know, who was shot and wounded in Scariff on the 18th of September. He's in Killaloe the night the lads are killed, you know, so there's, you know, I don't have evidence to say he was on the bridge involved in killing them, but he was certainly in Killaloe that night. But no, there aren't any locally born men, which I know it did happen, but it wasn't in this case. I mean, in most cases, obviously, RIC men were dispatched to different parts of the country from where they were born. But we did have a man from Newmarket on Fergus who joined the Auxiliaries, and that is probably more significant relating to was it Eamon asked the question, or Eddie asked the question, I think. But Patrick Cullen from Newmarket and Fergus had been in the First World War in the British Army, had adopted a very pro-British position, and had actually joined the Auxiliaries. So his involvement in this period and in this episode is, I believe, really, really significant as a local Clare man, being involved, and not just involved, he's involved in intelligence. So I probably won't go any further there just yet. Just yet.
You'll be taken out for that, yeah. Jane Halloran Ryan, well said, Tomás. Margaret Furlong, brilliant presentation, Tomás. Thanks to all of you. C. Crow, so sorry, money logging in now, got delayed. What's often misunderstood with the story of the Scariff Martyrs?
So Liz might come in as well on this, like, but certainly for me, I suppose, you know, and it's a typical thing enough, but I don't want to overstate it, but obviously it's often put down as the Black and Tans killed them, and Black and Tans were involved because the Auxiliaries captured them and officially handed them over to the RIC and Black and Tans. I have a contention that I think maybe all of them were involved, but certainly what rarely is said is that, you know, you rarely hear it said throughout the years that the RIC killed the Scariff Martyrs. Yet the RIC were involved in killing the Scariff Martyrs, and so were the Black and Tans, and so were the Auxiliaries. Obviously had a big role in it as well. So I suppose the involvement of the RIC, who were Irish men involved in their deaths, is probably something that isn't certainly at a public level as maybe recognised as it should be. And then maybe not at the local level, but maybe they're collectively put together as 4 IRA men when Michael Egan wasn't a member of the IRA, but obviously was, you know, very committed to supporting the other 3 lads and giving them shelter, etc.
Okay. Let's see. Liam Sullivan has said powerful words from Tomás in terms of the importance of local commemorations. It makes our national history local and therefore personal. There are still lots of stories out there that are not documented. What advice would Tomás give to other community groups who are planning commemorations over 21, 22, 23?
23? You want me to go there?
Why not?
How long have we got on Zoom? No, look, for me, and Pat, I'm sure would probably speak here as well, like that. For me, it's about shining a light on the daily relevance of the history of their local community. You know, I mean, I think if a commemoration group just becomes about one day in the year and, you know, a ceremony on that day, and that of course is part of it and it's important part of it. But in my view, you know, we have to be able to shine a light that's forceful enough and bright enough that people are aware of their local landscape, their local history, and how that relates to the national story and how the local is the national, as I mentioned earlier on. So I think commemoration to some degree is flawed in some sense, because it does tend to focus on that one day, and it's almost like the other 364 days aren't relevant to the story, where in fact the 365 days are relevant at a very simple level. You know, I'm around long enough to know that, you know, not everyone's going to become a historian or become massively historically aware, but to understand that, you know, the Lough brothers are from Shanaglich and to have a sense of their story. The same with, you know, Dick McKee or Peter Clancy or Conor Clune or the Scariff Martyrs. But I think that broader opening out of the relevance of the story to people locally, you know, even people who come into an area, you know, if they're living in a community, then the community memory and community history has a relevance to them.
Yeah, and also, like, I mean, we just want to just say this while it's in my head, like, if other groups around the country are planning commemorations and would like to do an event, you know, we'd be happy on Trasna and Tíre to facilitate. Hala has said she thought it was a great presentation. Thank you, Hala, for joining in. From Dunay's gone international, okay, just to let you know, totally international. If Hala has been in there, de Colgan, without local historians, we'd be left with facts and figures. I 100% agree with you there on that. Patrick Kilfeather, a truly wonderful presentation in memory of those who took on the might of the British Empire so that we might have our freedom. Brianna Curran, yes, we will be sharing this, and because she wants to share this on her LAOH division and Pennsylvania state pages. So like I say, super international we've gone now. Niall, it'll be shared, by the way, tomorrow on YouTube on the Facebook pages. Niall McMahon, was the name of the informer ever known?
Oh,
you got a book coming out, I understand, so maybe.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'll just make the point, Marcus, briefly, that you know, that obviously is a massive dimension of the story, and you know, it's typical enough. I think anyone who goes deep into this period of history and goes into that aspect of it will realize that, you know, there was unfortunately an awful lot more informers than maybe we'd like to accept. And certainly across my research over a lot of years, I've identified a lot of people who were involved in that activity. Now, in terms of the actual person who may have betrayed the men at the end, it's more difficult, it's more sensitive, and I made a decision a number of years ago. I'm dealing with it in the book. I'm dealing with the whole informer thing, but I did make a decision a long time ago that if I discovered a name locally, and certainly if that person had family members still in the local community, I didn't feel that the value to knowing the name would override the hurt you would cause to families in the community. Now, I know other historians who would disagree with that, but I think I can deal very comprehensively with the issue of the informer without actually naming who it likely was. And I think probably most people, certainly in East Clare, would agree with that, even though it's constantly comes up. I get asked the question an awful lot, and because the last line of the story is the day will come when all will know who sold their lives away, it remains a big issue in the story. But yeah, there was unfortunately a lot of people who were giving some information or another, some for ideological reasons, some for financial reasons, etc. But it is interesting that Martin Coonahan was shot and died very brutally on the 27th of October 1920, which was exactly 19 days before the Scariff Martyrs. So that was an alleged informer who was shot dead by the IRA because the suspicion was he was informing, yet 19 days later, the Scariff Martyrs were betrayed by another informer. So what you make of that is up to yourself, I suppose.
This is the 100th anniversary, so I'm reading out all your comments and questions, okay? So you take your moment, absolutely. Thanks, Tomás, for clearing that up, says Eamon Healy, and thanks for a fantastic talk to all involved. Great work. Jane Halloran, Ryan, great presentation. Marcus, Liz, Tomás, and Pat. Christina McMullen from Georgia, America. Fantastic lecture. So glad I was able to attend. Thank you all. C. Crow, in an East Clare context, how accurate are the military archive pension archives? Is it the case that a lot of pension claims made after the War of Independence were unsuccessful? Liz, do you want to mention anything about that, or?
Well, just from your own personal experience with the pension files, and they've been responsible for bringing so much more of our history to light at the local level. The BMH witness statements did it to a little degree, but they're only like 1,700 of them compared to thousands upon thousands of the pension files, and it brings it down to street level. Like seriously, you know, you can go find, like I'm again using an example, my area as an example, I can go to streets and find out where the person lived and find out what they did. And if you look at them independently, like with the BMH statements, maybe be cautious with them. The prime example I'll give you, the burn of the Custom House, where it was said 120 men took part, big disaster. Thanks to the pension files, I've been able to allocate about close to 300 men taking part, and the pension files have brought them to light, fellas I'd never even heard of. And when you join them with the witness statements, don't use them in isolation, use them with other sources that are available, the newspapers and so on. And the local newspapers are fantastic. And looking at use my example, as in me a dub, looking and reading about the Scariff Martyrs, I haven't a clue, you know, where Scariff is, Killaloe and so on. But looking at the local newspapers and those sources, you can then get to know the area. And I will say, I'm going to do a plug for Tomás's book. I've had the very, very brilliant opportunity of reading the book. When it comes out, everyone buy it. It's a page turner. You'll be crying. But my God, he has done those lads justice. So please, please, please buy it.
And to get the Liz Gillis recommendation is a high prestige itself.
Certainly is, yeah.
Yeah, so Matthew Lynn, brilliant talk. I learned a lot. Guramaila, Fahy, fantastic presentation. Best wishes from Miriam and John Fahy. Manuela, question to Tomás. Your presentation is very moving. You have the ability to bring this whole event to life. What was it like for the local people after the event?
Well, look, as I said, kind of very early on in the talk, you know, and maybe some people moved in afterwards. Like, it's important, maybe it bears repeating, Marcus, that like, I really feel strongly that there is this kind of duality where you have the family in some ways have to be separated out in terms of their experience to the broader community, because Jesus, it's not possible to understand, you know, the level of pain that those families went through when that news came back. 4 telegrams effectively told them that their sons were dead, and then obviously the condition of the bodies and all of that brought the rest to light. So that's I mean, and the Jerry Quinn and Mike Rodgers that would have a sense of from their family what was told about that and how it affected the people at a personal level, and the interior of the soul is only known to the person who has it, so like we don't even know beyond that. But in terms of the community, I mean, there's a real anger obviously within the community, you know. you can see, for example, that the mail cars are all raided in the weeks, and the month that follows at a very intense rate, because clearly the IRA are trying to find out where communication is coming from between Killaloe, Broadford, Scariff, etc. So you can see a desire to figure out what happened, how these men were betrayed is probably one of the first things the IRA are concerned about. But you can see within the community, obviously, there's an anger, there's a pain, there's an escalation from the British forces. There's continual raids, there's houses burned even in January 1921. Father Clancy, who was the local priest at the time, should be recognised, and his relation Cormac O'Corey, I think, was there a minute ago. I think he still might be there, but like, he had to deal with the aftermath of the Scariff Martyrs and in the months that followed, because even in April 1921 he was dragged from the altar in Scariff by Crown forces and forced out on the road to clear roads that the IRA had blocked. So there was an ongoing tension. In February of 1921, there's 3 British soldiers captured in Scariff, and they eventually are executed as on the basis that they were attempting to get information locally. Now, there's probably a debate as to whether they were or not. Certainly suspicious for 3 British soldiers who claimed to be deserters to go into North East Clare as opposed to going to Limerick or Innis, but they were executed. And there would be a suggestion that part of the decision might have been motivated by the fact that the lads had been killed in Killaloe 4 months earlier. So definitely, yeah, I mean, it's a very tense period, as it is across the country, throughout the early part of 1921. But in the case of Scariff and East Clare, it's down on top of what happened to the 4 lads in November.
That's shocking that he was dragged from the altar for relation to that. Niamh Hassett, whose father has been so good in terms of remembering oral history, and it's his anniversary this week. She thought it was a fantastic presentation as well. She thought that it was really, really good in terms of how it was presented. It was fantastic, heartfelt, Míle Míle because Carol McNamara, what year was John Conway and Joe Hogan's testimony collected, would you know, or by whom?
Yeah, I do. It was collected by Brian Graney, who was a scholar from Maynooth College, and it was 1953. And it's absolutely vital because he documented the testimony of John Conway, who was on the boat with them and who, witnessed the beatings. He was beaten himself, but he wasn't tortured. He hadn't anything to do with it. He just, himself and his brother Michael were in the area. They had milk in their pocket, and they were accused of bringing the milk to the 3 lads. So that was really, really critical. And Joe Hogan then, who was on the SS Shannon, there was a crew on the SS Shannon of 3 men, Joe Hogan, Joe McAvoy and George Shouldice, and they had to, take the boat with 30 auxiliaries all the way to Williamstown and bring them back. They didn't know what they were doing that morning when they arrived to work, even though there'd be some people, over the years who might have suggested that some knew, but I don't believe they knew anything about it. They just were the crew on the boat. But it was really, really critical in 1953 that Brian Graney captured that information.
Okay. Fahy, Liz is absolutely brilliant. Love their words. Willie Barron, great talk. Well done to all. Liam Shorthall, excellent. Thank you everyone for bringing such passion to this emotive event and for keeping the personal stories alive. John, fantastic story, very well told. Hala, RIP to all victims and martyrs. It's such great information to highlight the hidden history for the champion of Irish people. Thank you, Marcus and Tomás. Eddie Bowen, thoroughly enjoyed his presentation. Fascinating. Peter Flanagan, great listen. Wondering what was the immediate effect on the East Clare IRA. Did it encourage them, or did it? What happened in terms of the East Clare IRA directly after?
Well, you see, it's difficult. You can certainly see in as the immediate aftermath, there's an attempt to gather intelligence. There's no question about that. It was after a period of real, intense action, and you do see this kind of peaks and troughs in terms of local IRA activity. Generally, when there's an escalation, and particularly when there's a number of people killed, you then have a drop down because, if the raids increase, the IRA have to pull back and then retreat for a period of time. So it would have been typical enough after what happened in September and October for the IRA to pull back in East Clare a little bit. But by January, they launch one of the biggest attacks in the War of Independence in Cllr with the Linwood Ambush, which is just outside of Broadford in East Clare, so very close to what we're talking about here. And 6 members of the Crown forces are killed that day. So, many of the same people are involved. Brennan's involved, Joe Clancy, Martin Mack that I've mentioned already tonight. You know, they're all involved, the Nugents, etc. So, you know, you can connect that to a degree with what happened in Scariff. But there's no question, I mean, these fellas, Tom Mac in Mount Shannon, would have known him personally, Connie Turner, all these local IRA men knew the boys very, very well. So you can't discount the way that motivates fellas in terms of future activity. But we do have, you know, an evidence of certainly serious actions taking place in 1921 in East Clare.
Okay, and the book that's coming out next spring isn't it? What's the title?
Yeah. Well, that's the hope now. If COVID manages to shag off, we'll the book will be out, and it's the Scariff Martyrs: War, Murder and Memory in East Clare, and Mercier Press have been great with me for the last number of years, and looking forward to getting it out there, and hopefully, as I say, it'll be well received.
I think Des Dalton has said, well done to everyone, a great presentation. I think that the spirit of County Clare has been inspirational in terms of showing the rest of the country how to commemorate a really, really difficult, dark event in Irish history with pride. I think it's a full credit to you all in terms of how you did it. I think that when the people in 100 years' time are looking at commemorating the 200th anniversary of this, we would like to remind you all that we did this during a global pandemic and that you need to up your game, okay? And I would like to thank you all for coming in this evening. And I was privileged to have you all, Pat, Liz, Tomás, thank you so much for coming in. And thank you to everyone who joined in tonight. All right, thank you, everybody.
Very much.
All right.
See you in 2021. All right,
Welcome, Tomás and Pat.
Thanks, Liz.
take care.
Thanks, Marcus.